So today we're going to be focusing on part 2 of Ransom, and part 2 changes the viewpoint. While part 1 has been from Achilles and the Greek point of view, part 2 is located in the setting of the city of Troy, and it begins with a description of the physical setting of Troy itself, and the opening paragraph focuses on that description. And notice on page 40 here, we talk about another man, and that other man is in contrast to Achilles, who is obviously the focus of part 1. So this man has been, notice here these descriptions of his dreams. We know that it is Priam, and his son Hector has been killed by Achilles and then dragged around the city of Troy behind Achilles' cart for the last 11 days. So for 11 nights, Priam has been wrestling with dark thoughts. He lies sleepless on his couch. So he's not been in bed, he's been on his couch, but he's been sleepless in a manner of speaking. It is what is proper to his grief. So there's a sense of his obedience to what is proper, even in grief, that is communicated there about the character of Priam. But he has slept, but fitfully. So he's had a fitful sleep. And in his dreams here, he's picking his way past eddies of a murky flame, corpses heaped in piles in the archways and wells, and then he wakes even more exhausted. So the impact of the grief of his son's passing, but also I guess it's the role of king, that being unable to protect one's city, being unable to protect and look after one's people, that importance of that role is emphasized here. So, and that is continued here. The grief that racks him is not only for his son Hector, it is for a kingdom ravaged and threatened with extinction. So the impending doom, or the impending end of his kingdom, the kingdom of Troy, and also for his wife Hecuba and his many sons and daughters and his children under his weak protection. So that inability of him to be able to protect his children. I made a note in the final paragraph on page 40. So the citizens of Troy, although they believe themselves quietly asleep and safe in their beds, are the corpses he moves among. So the implication is that the citizens are not safe, that they are going to be headless and limbless. So they're the ones that the dogs are licking the splatter of their brains. There's some gruesome imagery which reinforces the horrors of war, particularly here, the impact on the citizens. Then, in the middle of page 41, something is different. So there's a change in the air. There is some other, a disturbance, but not a physical disturbance. It's shimmering, and Priam knows what this means from long experience. He stays ready but still. Just a grammatical note there. I noticed that this sentence is missing a subject. It's he knows from long experience what's expected. He stays ready, but still. There's a sense of action when we have sentences that are perhaps omitted subjects. Then one or other of the gods will materialize. So this shimmering that happens and the iridescence that happens up here is indicating that a god will arrive, will materialize, and he becomes dreamlike and passive, and he doesn't resist this anymore. And the boundary of what's solid and tangible, so what he can touch and what he can't, is blurred there. So the weightless medium is so that contrast between the real, what he can touch, the tangible, and this other, which is the weightless medium, the shimmering iridescence that indicates the presence of the gods. This is where they, in bodily presence, have the same consistency of his thoughts. There's an indication that there's a physical change that happens with his awareness of the presence of a god. And he explains that a couple of his children, his daughter Cassandra and the high priest Helenus, I have no idea how to pronounce it, sorry guys, but they also have his powers, which is the power to commune with the gods, the power to sense the gods' presence and communicate. And here is a description of Priam's relationship with the gods, or his the way that he perceives the gods. He talks about being reverent. For all his reverence, he is wary. So he's cautious. Gods do not always act openly, or so he's discovered. So he treads lightly in their presence. But Cassandra, his daughter, doesn't have that same wariness. She is half crazed. She's a bride of Apollo, so she's like married herself to the god Apollo. And there is a description of the way that she gives herself in service to the god Apollo, who takes her physically, which indicates that there is a physical sexual relationship, or so she believes. And over here on page 43, I have to apologize. I've just noticed that it's cut off the top line here, but this top line that you can't see now actually says Helenus, by contrast, is Apollo's consecrated priest. So he's describing his other son who has his gift, who is a professional communicator with the gods. He's austere, commanding, and Priam describes his gift, I guess, of communicating with the gods, close to the source. And right now he thinks of his role of king. So his body, in terms of his role of king, is not just his own, but it represents his land. And I think that's significant. I think it's something that we could talk about in terms of his symbolic nature of his role of king. So symbolism of the physical body. So his physical body symbolizes his kingdom. Interesting too that as he has aged, his nation of Troy has actually come under attack. So He even describes that the roads in his body, he feels them. So the roads that are in his kingdom, he feels them like ribbons tied at his center. So we'll turn to page 44. And on page 44, he talks about the fact that he has only 2 or 3 times during his reign has he gone out throughout the far-flung territories. He's not actually gone out to his own kingdom. It's a way of foreshadowing perhaps that this is not going to be the case. So he will be actually going to these outside territories. So his role is both actual and symbolic at the center of the nation. So at the bottom of 44, it talks about how for 11 days he has not had any food nor a drop of wine. So there's a fasting in his grief. And finally, there is a response. Now, assuming that's a response from the gods. So he has described from his perspective the death of Hector, how he has looked on helplessly as Achilles has dragged the corpse to his car, secured it, and tied it to his axle, and driven around the city of Troy. And King Priam has been half mad with grief. He's gone to the gates, but his children have stopped him. There is a description of the grief here, of the imagery of him sunk down in the dirt and the straw of the street and howls in pain, the desolation. Some vocabulary there that you could use to describe the intense grief of the father. And now we talk about here how Priam describes he has been reduced to what he was or what he had been when they, the gods, first reached down and plucked him out, an abandoned child who was stinking, but a child that has 70 years on his back. Now later on we learn that this is about his childhood, and there is a description of his being captured and enslaved as a child. We don't know this yet. It's a bit of foreshadowing perhaps, but also the description of how he is childlike, like inside he feels like a child, but he's 70 years old. And he claims that the gods are mocking him. And the god replies, this god, I believe, is Iris, who attends. He says, "No, you're not. You're wrong, Priam. I'm not mocking you." And the goddess Iris here says, "Not mockery, my friend, but the way things are. Not the way they must be, but the way they have turned out, in a world that is also subject to chance." Chance. Now this blows Priam's mind. He speaks the word out loud, which breaks this dreamlike spell on him, and Iris disappears. So it's this just short visit from the goddess Iris, but the conversation awakens Priam to the possibility that there is such a thing as chance, that not everything is planned, perhaps not everything is fated, but it has just happened that way. And this makes Priam bewildered, confused, and strangely excited at the same time. So this idea of chance really excites him. He then immediately has a clear mind and has a purpose. There's a sense of purpose in the way that he begins to think clearly. And because Malouf has written this in a way that allows the reader to see his internal reflections, to see his thought process, the reader becomes aware of the strength of his will and the strength of his purpose in his mind. So here he gets a vision or a picture that forms before him, and the picture is of him on a plain wooden cart with two black mules. He's wearing a plain white robe and no kingly ornaments, amulets, armbands, no form of royal insignia. And there's a man. So there's a description or a vision, a description. He has a vision. And there is a treasure that is underneath a plain white cover, and it's gold and bronze. And Priam, knows what it is. He doesn't need to look at it. It is the treasure in his, the treasure that he, the treasure from Troy. So, if we come back here, something to think about if you're watching this at home is perhaps Priam is blown away by this idea that he has a chance, that perhaps he can actually act, he can do something to change this destiny he's stuck in. For 11 days he's watched as his son's body has been dragged around this city walls. And this conversation gives him impetus to feel like he can perhaps act to change this, that this is not necessarily fated. But the interesting question is, if the gods hadn't actually, if Iris hadn't actually come and planted that thought with this comment, would he have had the thought for him to go out in the first place, to go and actually act to try and get his son back? So although the reason why he acts is because he believes he has free will, you may argue that it was the gods coming and giving him that idea, so perhaps his action is not free will but is fated after all. It's just something to discuss amongst yourself and ponder how much of this is actually his free will and how much of it is planned by the gods anyway. Anyway, so over to page 48, and we will complete at 49 here. And 48, he calls out to his wife. He knows what her response might be, so he's already predicting perhaps a negative response from her. She's not going to like this plan. He realizes that his plan is unprecedented. It's never been thought of. All of these thoughts before of chance are new, and so is his plan. His plan has never been thought of before, and this gives him a sense of boldness and of defiance. He is sure of his decision, and if he has to face his wife Hecuba and prevail, he has to be. Implying that perhaps Hecuba is a woman of some strength of will, that she won't be easy to convince this is a good idea. So we're going to stop there and continue with the second part of part 2 in the next video. Good luck with all of that, guys, and we'll see you in the next video.